Hello everyone, and welcome to today's MBS webinar. This is one of our marketing masterclasses for manufacturers and suppliers and construction products. And today's theme is all around planning for 2023. So we're very pleased that you could join us today. We've got a great panel to introduce you to in a moment, and we've got really exciting topics coming up for discussion. Just a couple of housekeeping points before we dive in. We're looking to run up to 60 minutes. Attendees have their microphones muted, but you can ask questions using the chat feature on your Zoom tool, and we will make sure that we get back to you with any answers after the session. So as I mentioned, today is all about planning for 2023. Very complex times out there in the market at the moment. Hopefully your 2023 will go off with a bang in a good way. But we do know that there's an awful lot of discussion and lots going on in the market around what the future of the construction industry and wider industries and the economy will look like. So today we're going to be talking all about how construction manufacturers can respond to that, what they need to do from a marketing planning point of view, and what the state of the construction industry might look like. So as I mentioned, we'll do quick intros. I'll introduce the panel in a moment. We're then going to have a 15-minute presentation from David Bain from our research team at NBS, who's going to give some key insights around the 2023 market outlook. And then we'll dive into panel discussion where we've got a few key questions that we'll go through and tap into the knowledge of our esteemed guests. As I said, we'll be looking to wrap up within an hour. So a quick welcome to the panel. We're delighted to have so many knowledgeable and interesting people joining us for the discussion today. We really appreciate you all giving up your time. So I'm pleased to introduce Chris Ashworth from Competitive Advantage, Andy Lambert from Adobe, Anna Hearn from Ridgemount, and then from NBS we've got Lee Jones and David Bain. And chaired by myself, my name is Cordy, and I oversee all of the supplier and manufacturer activities at NBS. So hopefully between us, we have all bases covered from technical side of things through to marketing, through to market analysis and digital marketing as well. Good, so just a quick intro on NBS for anyone that doesn't know us. NBS is all about connecting construction information. So we help suppliers and specifiers connect with each other. We've got a specification system that is cloud-based and used by the vast majority of leading practices, small, medium and large in the UK and beyond, to specify their projects. And we have tens of thousands of construction products within our system available for specification as well. And we really help suppliers get seen and specified by the right people, that specifiers and decision makers at all stages across the project timeline. So I'm going to hand over to David now. David is our research manager from NBS, and he's going to give us an overview of what the economic and industry outlook is for 2023. So over to you, David.
Thank you, Robin. Hi, everybody. So yes, excuse me, I'm going to just talk a little bit about the economic outlook for how things are mainly next year and a little bit beyond that, and also what our industry is looking like, but also pick out some things which perhaps we can look at in terms of opportunities over the next couple of years. So we've probably seen quite a lot of negative press about how the economy is looking at the moment, but just trying to look for some of the more positive things that we can take advantage of going forward. So firstly, we've probably seen lots of headlines like this over the last few weeks or so. So we are, it seems, in a recession at the moment, as the Bank of England has said, and the Office for National Statistics, with the mini budget causing the issues it did a few weeks ago, and then the latest statement we've had on the continued squeeze on cost of living, energy costs and high inflation. Households and businesses are obviously feeling this at the moment. In terms of kind of the global economy, it's looking difficult across the world, but there are some recent reports suggesting that the UK is not faring quite as well as other countries in the G7 and other major economies. A recent report by the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development showed that the UK economy is one of the few major G7 economies that's actually looking like it might shrink next year, along with Germany, whereas countries like France and the US, even though they're not going to grow very much, do appear to be weathering the storm a little bit better than us. So, so not the greatest sort of picture at the moment in terms of how things might be looking. But just to talk more specifically about the latest figures from the Office for National Statistics, they do suggest that we are in a recession now, with the first kind of estimate of the third quarter for this year showing a small drop, but a drop nonetheless. So GDP was estimated to have fallen by 0.2% in the third quarter, and fell in particular in September, although the bank holiday for the Queen's funeral is likely to have played some part in that particular fall. But nevertheless, it does look like we are kind of in a kind of shrinking economy at the moment. In terms of the different sectors of the economy, production in particular fell the most. Construction actually didn't fall, and we'll come back to that in a second. So in terms of forecasts and how things are looking over the 2023 in particular and beyond, the Office for Budget Responsibility forecasts GDP to fall by 1.4% in 2023. So that's been revised down from the March forecast, which it actually was for growth. However, looking on the bright side, it would have been worse without the energy price guarantee, which was announced by the government in the mini budget. So it could have been 1.1% deeper. So there's some kind of silver lining there. Return to growth is expected in 2024, but it is predicted to be, the longest recession for some time, and then kind of growth beyond that over the longer term. So turning to construction in particular, excuse me. So output will have been forecast to have grown 2% in this 2022. But there are indications that construction too is starting to fall. So manufacturer sales are starting to fall, and output is forecast to fall by 3.9% in 2023, and that's the forecast from the Construction Products Association. And like the economy as a whole, it is predicted to recover and start to rise again in 2024. Looking at other indicators of how the industry is doing, so the S&P Global Chartered Institute of Purchasers and Supply Construction Purchasing Managers Index, sorry, a bit of a mouthful, did increase in October to 53.2, but it also showed that new orders fell, and optimism about the future is also falling in terms of expected work. So again, confirmation really that things are starting to contract. So is it all doom and gloom? Because obviously it doesn't sound particularly positive at the moment. We might look at some things and try to find some areas where there are some reasons for optimism. So there's been some headlines that construction actually did grow in the last month, against that backdrop of falls. So the sector still kind of is quite resilient at the moment. That probably is going to change, but at the moment that is the case. And the chart from the Office for National Statistics on the right does show that last growth in the last month. These falls have come from high points as well. So the industry did recover, and the economy, after the pandemic. The shock that we saw after the mini budget with sterling dropping, that has kind of stabilized to some extent. So those things are better than they looked a few weeks ago. Unemployment is low, and also we're at a high point of inflation at the moment, but that is expected to drop throughout next year. So some of those price pressures will hopefully fall on reduce on households and businesses. The issues that we've seen over the last couple of years with availability of construction products, the lack of availability or the slow delivery times due to the pandemic and then due to the war in Ukraine. In terms of some of those causes, some of that we've seen has eased recently, so those sort of pressures have improved, and also other concerns making things perhaps a bit more challenging in the industry, like the introduction of the UK CE mark, may possibly be delayed. That hasn't been confirmed yet for construction products, as far as I understand, but there are signs that may potentially happen. So that might ease another challenge that suppliers are facing with having to get that marking approved. We know that there's a shortage of testing facilities in the UK to enable that. So that's kind of looking at the overall sort of general picture. I think what we can also do is look where some sectors may be growing against, sort of bucking the trend a little bit. So if we look into those now, these are areas where perhaps we can sort of potentially target activity and spend. So while things like housing are predicted to fall quite substantially over the next sort of year, there are some sectors which are predicted to continue being quite strong. So industrial has been really strong recently, and whilst that will drop, it is still expected to grow over the next year. So things like big warehouses and that kind of stuff for online fulfillment companies, where there's been such an increase in online shopping. So some of that will continue to grow, although will fall in 2024. Other areas are looking to be quite strong. Infrastructure still looks to be quite strong with some of the major projects planned. So there is, some, I know, potential delay with things like HS2 and some of the large nuclear projects like Sizewell C and Hinkley Point C. But if those are to come through as I think we're expecting, then those areas are likely to grow over the next few years, albeit not massive growth, but still growing. And also some public non-housing areas as well are looking like they aren't going to fall back. And that's all in terms of new work. In terms of repair and maintenance, public housing repair and maintenance looks like it's going to continue to grow. And also in terms of private housing, although that is falling, there are some areas which are going against that. So for instance, people are increasing their spend on things like energy improvement initiatives in their houses. So putting on photovoltaic solar panels, air source heat pumps and things like that to try and reduce their energy bills and be more sustainable. So there are certain niches where there is growth that we can sort of look to. Another area I thought it might be worth picking up on, and this is likely to be more useful to some organisations more than others, depending on kind of where your operations are globally or where it's possible for you to kind of look to operate or increase activity. But as I mentioned briefly at the beginning, certain geographies are looking like they're going to be faring better over the next couple of years than others. So whilst the UK might be struggling a bit next year, there are some areas, in particular some of the large developing economies, that are going to grow much more strongly, like places like India, other places in the Far East like Indonesia, and still China is also showing pretty strong growth as well. So there might be opportunities in other geographies to sort of increase activity while things are quite difficult in the UK. And then I kind of wanted to sort of end this presentation focusing a bit more on some of the insights that we've actually got ourselves from some of the research work that we do. So we just are running a survey at the moment with specifiers about how they use product information and what they value from product information, what will help them. The survey's only been live for a short time, but we've had quite a lot of responses, and I thought it might be useful to share some of the insights from that, which could be potentially useful for people that are marketing to architects and engineers and other specifiers. So some of the things that they've been saying are how much they value certification, so in terms of third-party certification. So a third saying that's essential for all types of product, but 9 out of 10 saying it's essential for safety critical products. So how much they kind of value having that. it's really useful for them when they're trying to make the right decision. There's been quite a lot talked about environmental product declarations recently. So we also asked about that, and 8 out of 10 specifiers said how those are really important for products as well. So if it's possible to provide those certifications, if potentially if you're not doing that already for some of those product areas, then that could be something worth looking at. In terms of the information formats, then we found that some formats are valued quite a lot more than others by specifiers. So in particular, technical formats like product data sheets and that kind of thing are particularly valued, and specification clauses, that kind of thing. Less valued for things like brochures. So maybe there's an area potentially where there could be savings. The production of brochures, could be potentially quite intensive, especially if you're still printing those kind of things. So that could be an area where perhaps money could be saved. So just a couple of sort of points there really that might be useful. We're going to be publishing the findings from that survey in the new year. So there'll be a lot more information from that, which we'll be sharing then. So that ends my slides. So if I can hand back to Robin now, thank you.
Yeah, brilliant, David. Thank you very much. That was very comprehensive in a short space of time, and I think really kind of sets the tone for our discussions this morning. And I guess if there was a headline in that, it's that perhaps the overall picture is not that positive, but within that there's many different stories and areas of focus, and some industries faring better than others, and some markets faring better than others, and always ways for individual organisations to cut through and present themselves in the best light versus their competitors. And I think a lot of strategy next year is going to be about that. It's going to be about finding those niches and those ways to compete effectively. Mm-hmm. So on that point, we'll dive right into our questions, and we've got 5 key questions that we're going to work through here with the panel. First one is pretty high level, and maybe it's we've covered some of this already, but I think it'd be interesting to see what the panel's views are. So question number 1 would be, what challenges will manufacturers face in 2023? And Chris, I can see you've got your mic off, so perhaps you want to your mic on rather. So perhaps you want to kick us off.
Thank you, Robin. Just to really add to the points David has been making, an additional challenge, if you like, for I think primarily the marketing departments, will be 2 of the outcomes from the Building Safety Act. And we've had the Code for Construction Product Information, CCPI, around for a couple of years now, I guess, and it doesn't really seem to have moved forwards too much. I understand, talking to manufacturers in the first wave, they're still waiting for that to progress. However, that doesn't mean to say it's not important. And I think manufacturers are wise to look at the code and start to look at ensuring they're implementing what are sound sets of advice within that. In addition to that, the CPA also issued a consultation white paper on construction product competence standard. I think it was in September. And this is both a challenge and an opportunity. It's and it is a white paper, so it's a discussion at this stage. But what it's setting out is the need for all those involved in specification, and that runs from architects and engineers through to manufacturers who are making product recommendations, to have a set of competence standards within their organization. So from the manufacturer's point of view, I think there's a need to look at all their customer-facing staff and decide how they're going to do that. So again, I'd suggest reading that competence standard to understand the way that's being approached. But also, I think it represents an opportunity, because architects, engineers, and contractors are also going to have to demonstrate competence, and part of that competence is about product. And as you know, I'm a big advocate of CPD, and I think it'll be an opportunity for manufacturers to provide those CPD seminars to help the decision makers in raising their competence standards. But again, I think it's important that manufacturers think about how their CPDs will fit into those standards. So at this point, I think it's read it, think about it. If there are issues you can highlight, feed them back to the CPA. But if not, start putting in place processes to take advantage of that.
Brilliant, thanks, Chris. Lee, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd just like to add to what Chris was saying actually about the code for construction product information. Obviously, this has been around for a while, and the sort of the official push of it has been slightly delayed, but it does set a clear roadmap of what manufacturers should be doing with the product information and how that's marketed. If anybody's interested in it, we did a sort of executive summary / overview of this on MBS, so that's available to download at the mbs.com. But there's a lot to take in there, and it does, like you say, extend to professional competency and also the internal sort of structure of how you manage the data, as well as displaying it and providing it to the specifiers. Just in relation to David's presentation, the UK CA mark has actually been delayed now till the 1st of January 2025. So that's we've been given another 2 to 3 years grace on that from a manufacturing point of view. So that is something that they don't have an obstacle for. I think one of the big things, though, that manufacturers, and particularly the larger organizations, are going to face is gearing up for the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. So we have a lot of manufacturers that are British based, but we also have a lot that are headquartered in Brussels, Germany, France, wherever in mainland Europe. The reporting directive for sustainability information is going to come into force. So you've got to measure from 2024. But for those that aren't doing that at the moment, it's going to be a very big culture shock, because it does ask for a lot of information that people aren't doing now. And that ties in quite well to environmental product declarations for your products. So as well as checking what you're doing as a business, and allowing that information to be captured and the metrics to be done there, it's also that opportunity, I think, to tie into getting your products measured from a life cycle analysis point of view. Specifiers, as David pointed out in his presentation, are looking for these things, and it's something that we see through the platforms all the time, as the information, particularly around carbon, for your products. So if it's something that you've not focused on now, maybe take a look at it, or drop us a note, and we'd be happy to chat through what we know on that. But I think, yeah, certainly aligning your data digitally to the code and making sure that you're geared up for the demand for sustainability information that's going to be asked from you. It's going to stand you apart from the competition next year, I think, particularly with the downturn.
Brilliant. So economic challenges, sustainability challenges, and product data challenges, but all of those actually present an opportunity as well for those manufacturers and suppliers that are able to grasp those and run with them and improve what they do. Is a way to cut through and compete. I'm going to move us on to the next question. What marketing activities should you prioritise in 2023? So Anna, do you want to come in at this point?
Yes, why not? One of my favourite subjects. Okay, what should we be prioritising? What I'm finding that my clients are increasingly asking for is activity that they can measure, how they measure the response, which is easier to do if you're looking at digitally led campaigns, but that is really where they're focusing their marketing budgets, things that they can point to say, what did people do as a result of receiving that piece of information. For us, that means really focusing in on targeting, on understanding who our clients' target audience is in a very precise way, not just as groups, but as individuals. So we're really focusing on understanding who those individuals are that we're trying to reach, what they're like as people, not just as professionals, and where they hang out, what channels they're likely to be using, and how they like to receive information. And being able to use very targeted channels means we can design messaging that's very specific for quite small target audience groups. And I think that's the way forward for 2023, is to really look at understanding your audience as individuals and, as I say, where they hang out and what sort of information they like to receive. And that isn't always good news for people like me. I mean, your comment in the summary slide at the beginning about specifiers wanting less brochures and more text-based information. And I think that's really interesting, because marketers have to react to what their target audiences want to get, rather than what we want to show them. And I think it's always good to remember that you really need to focus on that first. What does your audience want to hear? How does it want to hear it, rather than the other way around? I think that's a good lead in, perhaps.
Yeah, that's great, Anna. And I think we've been banging the drum for digital marketing at NBS for a long time, and you know, every year it seems to grow in importance. You're right; it's always all about understanding your target audience and what's important to them. And you know, we would always say it's important to get the right mix. So that's a mix of, you know, digital activity, promotional and technical marketing, making sure you're providing the right specification clauses, obviously, and you know, whatever other activities are right, and having that kind of test and learn approach to be able to try things, and if they don't work, respond rapidly and try new ones rather than getting stuck in the same old patterns, I think is critical. I was wondering about bringing Andy in at this point, and getting your thoughts on what activities that people might want to prioritize. And I know you've got some data to share with us as well on social media and SEO.
Yeah, why don't we flick onto that as a starting point, because there are some interesting shifts underway, and this data is from Global Web Index across 4 million internet users across the world. But this is a trend we see playing out. We've been watching it closely for the last kind of 7 years or so, where increasingly users are orientating to social ahead of search. So, and this is both for finding out information and gaining inspiration as well. So this particularly, and this research particularly relates to finding product information, which I think is a really interesting shift. Now, this doesn't mean that everyone needs to give up on search and focus on social, but we're starting to see, you know, to your point, Robin, about like how we can create a good balance between the different channels that we utilize to grow our businesses. And this has been a trend that's been driven by Gen Z, as you can see from the bottom chart. But increasingly, if you look across all internet users, when people are trying to find product information, increasingly, they're going to social ahead of search. And the reasons for this are pretty obvious, because if you try and Google anything these days, the only things you see are the people that can game SEO the best. And users are getting tired of that. So whereas social actually leans much more into how really decisions are made. Decisions are made based on the underlying feeling of trust. Trust is usually built from peer recommendations, and peer recommendations typically will happen across social. So increasingly we're seeing that shift. And I find that fascinating because it talks to a point that Chris mentioned a few minutes ago, which is around the kind of educational piece. And increasingly, we're seeing users start to orientate both to search and social to really learn something new and be able to gain additional value around the thing that they want to learn. So Chris spoke about CPD, but we see this playing out, because I'm not from the construction industry, we see this playing out in loads of other industries where educational content that provides value, and content, to Anna's point, that is absolutely intrinsically linked to the precise audience that you're trying to target, tends to be winning out, because that's fundamentally how brands are built. Brands are built through trust. Trust is built through the value that you provide. And increasingly, we're seeing that play out. We've been seeing it play out on search, but we're seeing it increasingly play out on social.
Very interesting indeed, yeah. And I think you know, clearly that's applying in the B2C world, but I think there's an awful lot of parallels in the B2B world as well. So those themes around trusting peer recommendations and that advocacy, rather than, you know, what Google is pushing to the top of their results. I think maybe 5 years ago people were a lot more trusting of the search engines, and actually now most people understand that the results are either paid for with pay-per-click ads, or, you know, increasingly gamed through SEO, which is, you know, a legitimate approach. But usually you're only seeing what, 10 to 12 results now on the Google results page, and it's actually quite hard to drill down much further than that. And I think it's quite illuminating actually to see the shift there, and I wonder what that will look like over the course of the next couple of years as well.
I think you make an interesting point actually about B2B versus B2C, because I would argue that doesn't exist anymore. Humans make decisions, so the more that we can understand who we're serving, and I've always been a huge advocate of thinking about, when you're thinking about audience targeting, think about psychographics over demographics, understanding how people make decisions and the true things that they need as individuals. We're all biased, right? We're fundamentally flawed as human beings, right? So we all make decisions based on emotion. That typical emotion is trust. So it's sometimes we we get a bit confused in B2B marketing. I've spent my life in B2B. We try and make things too overcomplicated when at the core, we are humans and we want to make both the quickest and the decision that we have most trust in. So sometimes it helps just to kind of remove those barriers of B2C versus B2B, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think when when specifiers are looking for a product, they may not be purchasing it themselves, but we know that they're time poor. We know that they want to do a good job, but we know that they also need to find things that meet their needs and comply with all the technical standards. And the more quickly and the more efficiently they can do that, the better for them, and the better for the manufacturers that they're going to be specifying as well. Chris, did you want to add something on that one?
Yes, I think it's a very interesting point that Andy makes there and that change. And I think picking up on both his points and Anna's before that, one of the areas for improvement, I think, is to look at the various existing marketing collateral that organizations have and ask themselves, how can we reuse this or make it more effective to meet these changing requirements? So in terms of social, a lot of things that have been prepared, blog articles, things of that nature, maybe video clips, can be reintroduced in the social environment to play on this. So it's not about massive marketing spends, although obviously investing is important, but it's about how can we improve on what we've already got and make that even more effective than it used to be.
Yeah, and how can you build that trust? Absolutely.
Yes, and trust
is so important. Very good. That takes us nicely, I think, into the next question, which is around how can you stand out from the crowd? So it's going to be arguably more important than ever in 2023, where there's going to be plenty of work around, but maybe not as much as previously. And it's going to be important for any business that they can cut through and stand out. So anyone want to jump in on that one?
I'll go, Robin.
Yeah, go.
Yeah. So one of the things that we have as a benefit within MBS is obviously we're seeing information from thousands and hundreds of thousands of construction products, making sure that your information that you're providing is concise, so there's not like gaps in it, but make sure you understand what the specifiers are looking for. And I think that David's survey that you mentioned earlier, things like that are a great place to start to look as to what the priorities are for the people that you are actually trying to convey your message to. One of the big things that we're noticing a gap with at the minute is environmental declarations. That there's a lot going on there. I think there's quite a key thing where greenwashing's been obviously monitored within the press, and the CMA, we had those on one of the webinars at the end of last year, where it's been looked at to be ironed out. But people are looking for information about what your product can do, what the consequences are to the environment up to it, and then what can be done with that product at the end of its life. If you can convey that information nice and neatly, it's going to help you stand out from the competition. I think with anything that's non-mandatory, it's always perceived as a nice to have, and that there are some simple quick wins that I think people can do there to make themselves stand out, but make sure that you're open and transparent about the information. Don't go down the route of trying to polish something that's actually can't be backed up and validated.
Yeah, brilliantly, and that reinforces that point around trust as well. And I would say as well, the more data we're seeing coming through from specifiers every month, we get more feedback from the market around how much more important sustainability criteria is becoming. I think it's always been important, but now it's really becoming a key decision-making factor, to the point where if you're able to declare more clear environmental properties versus your competitors, there's a good chance that that you may be chosen over them. Anna, did you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, because that whole issue is really, I think, is really interesting in terms of the drive towards improving sustainability and reducing carbon emissions. I think particularly, I suppose I've been more involved in the house building sector than maybe some of the other sectors in this market over the years. And I've been around long enough to remember the last time we were here, where we had a target to build zero carbon houses by 2016, that simply evaporated after the last economic downturn, which pushed housing construction down in 2008, moving on. I'm telling my manufacturer clients, stick with it. The investments you're making in improving your environmental standards are critical and will remain critical. But I think that's going to be a question moving forward, when we're challenged economically. How much are companies going to continue to invest in what is quite a long journey to zero carbon, requiring consistent and repeated investment to get them there? So good on for the specifiers for insisting that we provide that information, because we need to keep the pressure all the way down the supply chain to make sure we actually get to where we're trying to head. But I also completely agree about being very precise in terms of what you are saying about your environmental credentials. I'm in marketing. I know how easy it is to use terminology that's imprecise to give an impression, and we really need to move away from that. If sustainability is a very difficult thing to measure, there's a certain amount of skepticism, justifiable skepticism, about the way sustainable goals or sustainable trajectories are reported. And it's incumbent on all of us who work in marketing to make sure that we control the accuracy of that messaging and are precise about what we're saying, and understand the calculation methods that are used to support the points that we're making in public. I feel really strongly about this, because to try and put a positive spin, as you say, on something that's actually quite difficult is a very, very retrograde step. But it will be great to see the entire supply chain reiterating a combined commitment to move towards zero carbon. And it's particularly complicated for manufacturers. You mentioned manufacturers that are based outside of the UK. In our experience, the UK is really leading the field here. If you go to manufacturers, and this surprises me, who are based particularly in Germany, they're just not looking at it. They don't have the same degree of scrutiny on sustainability measures that we're implementing in the UK, because they're just not that far down the road in terms of a government commitment to zero carbon. And what I want to see is the UK continuing to push forward and not deciding that perhaps it can relax a bit, as our European counterparts don't seem to be as committed to this objective as perhaps we are. And the outcome of COP27 doesn't fill me with enormous optimism for that particular goal moving forward. Sorry, that was a bit of a polemic, but it's a subject I feel very strongly about.
Yeah, no, it's all really good points, Anna, and I'm sure will be the subject of future webinars, and we've already got a few on our website. Lee, did you want to say a final thought on that?
Just very quickly, that there are some positives. The Part Z approved document proposal is actually getting its second reading today in the House of Commons by Jerome Mayhew. So that is progressing. It was dropped a couple of years ago in the pandemic, but it's been picked back up. And I think the sort of the goal at the moment is to have that implemented by 2025. So that will make it a regulatory compliance to actually measure the embodied carbon within buildings. So just something to note. And yeah, it's something that the UK are obviously doing above and beyond maybe some of the other territories now.
Chris, did you have a final point on that?
Yes, a couple of points. One is, I think with regard to the drive towards zero carbon, yes, the government's the catalyst. Yes, the government sets out its aspirations, and if I'm a little cynical, then leaves the industry to sort out how on earth it's going to happen. But I think in terms of clients, and I'm thinking outside house building here, I'm thinking in the other sectors, I think there's quite a strong desire amongst clients to demonstrate their zero carbon credentials, which is incidental to the government's aspirations. And I also think from a practical point of view, there's a concern that they don't end up having buildings which maybe are compliant with today's standard, but in 2 years' time, when some new standard is introduced, they're not compliant. So I think the drive for zero carbon is more than just something the government is imposing upon us. So I think that's good news. The other point I wanted to make, again, picking up on Anna's earlier comment about the accuracy and comprehensive nature of messaging, is that it really stands out when checking websites. For example, we did a project for a client earlier this year, and they wanted an evaluation of their competitors' websites on a variety of things, including sustainability. And so we went through and looked at each website, and very quickly, what they don't say, or some very sort of broad statements, tells you, well, they're not really committed to this at all. And I know MBS allows an easy comparison between products in the same way, but by not saying things, you sometimes send a stronger negative message than actually saying perhaps a smaller thing. So I think that's also important in terms of the messaging and the information that's put out.
Yeah, Absolutely, it is, and of course, that probably links into something I wanted to touch on quickly, which is around, how do you build that right messaging, and how do you get that right balance of kind of brand marketing and what your key cut through is alongside tactical activities. And I know, Andy, you've got a bit more data on that we wanted to talk about in terms of what the right balance is and how you do both.
Yeah, I do love a chart. So yeah, I think Chris called it out earlier about it's about striking the right balance, and this is often a tension that everyone feels in marketing. It's the balance between short and long-term activity, because we know we need both. There was a great study on this. This is like, part of marketing folklore, really, of it's called the short and long of it. And I've been a huge advocate of that in building and growing and selling businesses over the last 7 years. Ultimately, we need to find the right balance, because it's important to note that only 5% of any given market are in the market to buy at any one time, meaning 95% of that market are not currently looking to buy your product. That's an important thing to bear in mind, because our job is, yes, to convert the 5% that are in market, but to drive awareness for the 95% that aren't. So getting this balance right is a delicate thing to do, because naturally, short-term stuff, as we can see with that yellowy line there, that is important to drive immediate sales. And of course, given the data that David presented right at the start, we know that's going to be absolutely essential. And there's fantastic tools that allows us to capture that demand. And I think it's a really important thing just to think about marketing from two lenses, really. There is demand creation and there's demand capture. So capturing demand, the latent 5% that are in the market to buy, there's some great products and services, NBS, fantastic tool to help you capture that demand for sure. But of course, we need to balance that with how do we build the foundation for long-term growth, which is about brand building activity. Oftentimes we think about brand building as something like a bit esoteric and fluffy, as just putting logos somewhere, but it's not that. It's about actually, how do we build, we said this word numerous times already, how do we build trust at scale? Trust at scale is built by operating in the right communities with the right folk, and delivering the right kind of educational content that adds value. So creating that balance, that's going to help a business stand out, because naturally many businesses, especially in B2B, are so obsessed in driving the performance orientated activity and going all in on that 5% that's in the market, forgetting to build for the long term through brand orientated activity. So yeah, sorry to sound a bit like a kind of on my soapbox talking about this one, but as you can tell, I feel
it's a really important concept, this, and I think because some good practical examples would be perhaps doing CPDs is it's great for long-term brand building, and you're able to reach that 95% audience who may not need your product right now but will do one day, versus more tactical things, which might be a sales campaign or an event which will give you maybe a few leads in the short term, but then it's over, and actually you need to do both to keep building. Anna, I think you had a point on this one as well.
Yeah, I'm a marketer, so you'd expect me to say this, but if you invest in your brand heavily in a downturn, and what you'll be needing to do in a downturn is take market share if you're going to continue to maintain your volume. But if you can do that in a downturn, then when the market picks up and the volume expands, then your sales volume grows without you having to do too much. So as I say, you would expect me to say that, wouldn't you? But it's such an easy thing for companies to do when they're looking to cut their costs, to axe the marketing budget. In my view, totally the wrong thing to do, but yeah.
Yeah, and there are all sorts of studies out there, aren't there, that show that brands that do invest in their long-term marketing strategy during a downturn ultimately come out much better overall. So I'm sure we'll share more on that in due course. I'm going to move us on to the next question. We just got a couple more to get through, and I know a couple of the panel are on tight timelines, so we'll move on. What will specifiers need from manufacturers in 2023? David's got some slides to share with us in a moment on this, but Lee, I was wondering if you had any points in addition to what we've discussed already.
Yeah, definitely. So we've obviously discussed building safety and sustainability, which I think information surrounding those two things are absolutely critical. But I think the number one thing would be third-party certification to back those claims up. It's all well and good making statements about what your product, system, material does, but the trust building side of things, which obviously links back into that brand reputation again, will only come if you can actually evidentially prove what it is that you're doing. So yeah, I think we're looking for information regarding the fire performance, particularly of products in a safety aspect, for particularly critical products, but for all products, the sustainability information. And if you can verify those claims, I think that's really what the specifiers are going to be looking for throughout next year and onwards, really.
Yeah. Brilliant. And David, why don't you take us through the data that you've recently captured around this?
I mean, yeah, in terms of challenges, I think a lot of it is the things we've been talking about. There's the obvious that if the amount of work that's around is going to fall next year, then that's going to be challenging for architects and other designers and specifiers. So they're going to be experiencing falling revenue and pressures, and probably their time's going to be even more squeezed. As they probably having to cut costs. So that's always been a big challenge for specifiers. Architects, they have to kind of deal with such a wide range of information and products, and they can't possibly be experts in all of it. So I think anything that helps them to get the information they need as quickly as possible, and again, the trust thing, being able to trust what they see and what they can access, know it's accurate and up to date. I mean, that message does come back quite consistently from specifiers, so that's really what they need. It's most important. And the survey that we're just doing at the moment reinforces it again, that's really important to them, that they can very quickly access good, current, up-to-date technical information. I mean, they certainly want the inspirational stuff as well, and we do hear the importance of things like really good quality images that sell a product, and seeing them in situ in a project, and that stuff's obviously very important as well. It's getting the balance right between those two things.
Yes, yeah, and make it easy for them. That theme doesn't change over time. So you might have a beautiful website, but if they can't find the information they're looking for, then you're not making it easy for them. And we know that they're a time poor audience who need things and need the right information quickly.
Yeah, I once heard an architect sort of give an example of that, where they were basically saying they go to a manufacturer's website and they essentially want to be able to see really great images of the product that showcases that product, but then also be able to very, very quickly, within a couple of clicks, get straight through to the technical data, so they can then download all the information they need. So it's being able to do those two things really quickly and easily, and being able to trust it.
Brilliant. That's a really nice summary there, David. And we touched on quite a lot of those points already, which is great. So I'm going to move us on to our final discussion point, which is we talked about the brand building side and some of the technical sides. How do you generate a steady flow of project leads? So how will manufacturers and suppliers keep building their pipeline during what could be a challenging year? Who would like to jump in on this? Anna?
I think being consistent, working out what your key advantage is, what it is that you want your users to understand, and stick with it. Don't change trajectory halfway through the year. Establish your reputation for the thing that you think you offer that's better than anybody else, and make sure you broadcast that message as widely and repetitively as possible. We all need to see the same message several different times, often in several different ways, before we really get it. So keep going. Be consistent would be my number one piece of advice.
Yeah, great. Couldn't agree more. And Chris, did you want to echo that?
Yes, I think Anna's absolutely right there. It's also about a bit of analysis using the data that's available, and now MBS, and of course with your link through to Glenigan, there's a massive resource that can help manufacturers identify who the key movers and shakers are, the decision makers, so that the sales team can be directed to where they're going to get the best chance of success, rather than wasting time cold calling or knocking things around. So you can be really, I think you can put a lot of work into thinking smart and making the maximum use of your sales team. And once you've got them in front of the right people, making sure they've got sales support material to demonstrate those benefits, the points that we've been talking through over the last 15 minutes or so.
Yeah, absolutely. You set me up for a shameless plug there, Chris, because obviously NBS has the link through to Glenigan now. And we're shortly going to be launching a new contractor leads feature where you'll be able to see projects that have been specified but where the products haven't been selected yet. So that will enable you to see those contractor leads via NBS and then link straight through to Glenigan and see all the information about that project, who the contractors are, what the timelines are, all the planning documentation, everything else. So really exciting one that we're going to be launching soon. Lee, did you have a point on that?
Yeah, I think I was just going to say, don't forget CPD. Obviously, a lot of these slides in the conversations have discussed obstacles effectively and the change of regulation and the landscape that goes with that. I think for manufacturers, that can be an opportunity more than anything. Obviously, the specification community are having to grapple and overcome all of these changes, and in a downturn when that's happening at the same time. As a manufacturer, if you can actually grasp those subjects and that knowledge, deliver that in your CPD. I think when we are aligning manufacturers with their CPD with the RIBA, a lot of manufacturers tend to try and go down the technology route. And I've always said this, is that they've got to do these 10 core curriculum areas. Sustainability is one of them, for example. You could do a specific CPD on the changes to Part L, or you could look at specifying low carbon materials and the sustainability side of things. And then building safety as well. If the changes are happening there with what's happened since the Building Safety Act's been introduced. And I know there's a lot of things coming on board next year with the different stage gates within the industry from 2023. I think it's from March onwards. There's a lot there that manufacturers, I think, can lever on. So that could help generate your leads from the beginning. And that starts even before often a project's got to the concept stage.
Yeah, absolutely. And David, did you want to comment on that?
Well, I wanted to quickly kind of sort of reinforce that because talking to specifiers and doing the surveys we do, they consistently sort of tell us that the aspects of CPD they really value are those that help them understand sort of the regulations and how they need to comply. And so having those elements of CPD that help them understand building safety and sustainability, I think is particularly valued. And as we said, there's that long-term kind of strategy of building that relationship and brand with them over time. One of the other things as well, which we know that they value too, and from the survey we're doing at the moment, we've got feedback on that, is where manufacturers can help specifiers write specifications. So collaborate with them to do that, especially with complex systems. Specifiers really value that technical input and advice, and being able to sort of work with manufacturers to do that is something which is really valued. If this, I think manufacturers might find that the specifiers would be really kind of open to working in that way. It's something they value.
Unmute myself. Chris, did you have a final point on that one as well?
Yes, just building on what I said about identifying the key players. The CPD is a great way of getting them to want to talk to you, because it's easy to know who the organisation are. It's much harder to get through the door and to be able to get their attention. And the CPD, particularly those around new challenges like the changing legislation, are very, very valuable in opening that door for you. And also, picking up on that last point about the specification, it's the opportunity to explain why your specification is relevant and important by going through the issues that it covers. So again, CPD, as you know, I'm a big advocate of CPD. It's a key in that whole activity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're gonna have to wrap up in just one moment. But Lee, did you have a finishing comment there?
Yeah, I was just going to mention about the specification writing service that manufacturers can offer, particularly if you're doing complex systems. As obviously, most of the specifiers will be using MBS Chorus, but that's available to the manufacturers as well. We're seeing quite an uptick at the minute, particularly with building envelope system manufacturers, where they are really pushing to get their master specifications done so they can work with the specifiers and the platform that they are using. But also we're seeing an increase in execution clauses, which when manufacturers and all the ones that I've worked for in the past have provided a written specification to an architect or a contractor, whoever it is that's been requesting it, that hasn't factored in. So how the product should be installed to retain the warranty and to meet the actual installation requirements is obviously a key focus now, particularly around building safety. So yeah, if you want to know any more about that, you can obviously chat to us, but it's something to bear in mind that you might need to just go that little bit above and beyond with your spec writing service than you have done previously.
Absolutely. Anyone who's interested, do speak to us about our Chorus for Manufacturers service. Fantastic. Well, I mean, we've covered so much on this. I feel like there's another 10 different webinars that could probably come off the back of this on all sorts of just different topics. What I would say is, for anyone who would like to find out more on any of this, please do reach out to any of the panel. You'll find them all on LinkedIn, and I'm sure they'll be happy to engage and answer any questions that you've got. You can visit manufacturers.thembs.com or give us a ring to find out more, and would like to help you start building your exposure with specifiers. But also our mission is very much just around helping the industry build better as well, which is why we push out so much of this this thought leadership content. It just remains with me to say thank you very much to everyone that's joined. If you've answered a question, if you've asked a question, we'll make sure we get back to you with an answer. I'd like to say a huge thank you to the panel. I think we've lost Andy as he had to jump off to something else, but it was great to have his input. But thanks so much to Anna and Chris from Ridgemount and from Competitive Advantage, and thanks to David and Lee from NBS, and thanks in absentia to Andy from Adobe. And we'll see you next time. Take care.